KFSR and CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger, a public affairs program featuring stories from all over the Central Valley with Sevag Tateosian, 90.7 KFSR.
I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Welcome to the Central Valley Ledger. We're here in the beautiful studios of the Community Media Access Collaborative Fresno Clovis in downtown Fresno. With me is a friend of mine, Professor Bryan Tellalian from Reedley College. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Talk a little bit about Reedley College. So where's Reedley College?
Reedley College is part of the State Center Community College District. It's about half an hour southeast of Fresno, so it is a rural, it's settled in a rural community. The majority of our students are Hispanic, between the ages of 21 to 24. Roughly half are female, half are male. A lot of first-generation students there at Reedley College. So it's a great place to teach. The commute it's a great commute. In the morning, you can see the mountains and so forth. And I've been there for the last 2 years, and it's just been a privilege to be teaching political science there.
One of my favorite things about Reedley is the river that goes through the city. When that river is full, isn't that a beautiful sight?
Absolutely, yeah. There's nothing quite like it. So, and then I believe there's a few restaurants and some other businesses along the river as well, and so that sort of adds to the ambiance of that area.
What's the typical path for a student that's enrolled in Reedley College? I mean, are they going to Fresno State, or do they go there a couple of years and transfer, or do you offer four-year degree type things?
So community colleges typically offer a 2-year associate's degree. Something we're working on right now is getting the various disciplines to create associate transfer degrees. The idea, and that's in accord with SB 1440, which mandates that the community colleges in their respective disciplines create a transfer degree so that they can more easily transition to a 4-year. So for example, about a year ago, we created a transfer degree in political science. And what that means is there's a series of lower division classes they can take, including classes like international relations and comparative government and a political philosophy class and some others. And they'll have their associate transfer degree in political science. So if they wanted to transition over to Fresno State or Fresno Pacific or Cal Poly, then they can more easily do so. So the idea being that we're trying to facilitate students getting through their college experience in a more manageable time frame.
And, you know, I don't mean to ask you a specific question about this, but is it a fairly new college? Because years and years ago, I don't remember that there was a Reedley Community College, unless I'm mistaken. Or have you done some renovations? Because, you know, when I passed by it, there were some areas that looked brand new.
Well, I've only been there 2 years, so the history is that, yeah, I think it was Kings County or Kings Community College or something to that effect, and later became Reedley College. But as for the particular, we have some other folks who might be able to give you some additional detail. But yeah, that's there, and there have been some new renovations. And then with the Measure C money, we'll see there's be some additional renovations as well. So we're looking forward to that.
Tell our audience members about you. Talk about your educational background, your family, roots.
Okay. So I was born and raised here in Fresno, California. Grew up in Fresno my entire life. My parents were teachers in the K-12 system in Fresno Unified, now retired and enjoying retirement. Got a younger brother who's a doctor. As far as my pathway to becoming a community college professor, I did my undergraduate work at UC Davis. I was a double major, political science and communications, minored in comparative literature, and then interned for a quarter there on the quarter system there at UC Davis in Washington, D.C. Upon graduating from UC Davis, I worked a few years in Sacramento in California state politics, starting out as a press aide for a gubernatorial campaign, and worked on some ballot initiatives and some public relations firms up there. Came back, got my JD at San Joaquin College of Law, started teaching as an adjunct in the community college system, and 2014, fall of 2014, I started a full-time tenure track at Reedley College.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
I'm smiling as you're talking because it feels like yesterday you and I were in the same law school class going over law stuff, and here we are both taking a different path from law. But, you know, and I say that, but I want to ask a follow-up question.
Sure.
Your path is different from the law path because, you know, most people think you go to law school, you become an attorney. Has the law degree helped you in your role as a professor?
Certainly, in a few different ways. First, with regard to teaching political science, with that legal education and that legal academic experience, we approach the subjects in a little bit different way than the traditional poli-sci route that you would go through getting your master's and PhD and so forth. And so when I'm developing assessments for my students, whether it's an exam or whether it's a paper or whether it's a simulation, I do it with those things in mind. And I'm always asking my students, presenting them rather with a factual scenario, and then asking them to apply what they've learned to that situation. So for your viewers, right, what do we learn in law school? Facts, issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. We call that IRAC. And we do that over and over and over again, whether it's a field of law that's more reliant on case law, like constitutional law, or whether it's more statutory based. So that's something that I've imparted to my students. Beyond that, in the community college system, the emphasis is on teaching, and there's also an expectation that the faculty will participate in the governance of the college. So that means serving on governing committees, which means that we have a part in assuring that the college is complying with the state ed code, the regulations for the state of California, at the Board of Trustees level, the board policies and the administrative regulations, and any other laws that we have to be familiar with, like the federal ADA laws and so forth.
So now it's summertime for a lot of students. Are you still working on plans, and what do professors do in the summertime?
Well, I got up from a nap to come over here. No, I'm kidding. So what do we do in the summer? Well, probably immediately following graduation, the graduation ceremonies, which is the second or third week of May, you will have faculty take, some time off. Some of us are serving on hiring committees that are going on over the summer. Some of us are engaged in prepping for our classes for the upcoming year. You'll always see, we'll always be tinkering over the summer with our classes. And what I've been working on these last couple of weeks is preparing for our annual Constitution Week conferences that we hold at Reedley College. We've just started within the last 2 years. Some professors are on sabbatical, and some professors are, doing a little bit of everything. So it's not 3.5 months of a pure vacation, but it allows us an opportunity to focus on things when we don't have other things when we don't have classes. So that's what we're doing with that time.
I thought of you when I was looking for guests for this program because there seems to be this election cycle some fascination with one of the candidates, which is Donald Trump. Why do you think this is going the way it's going?
Well, there are 3 reasons, I think. I don't know how many of these factors are discussed elsewhere, but in the first place, if you start with the Bush administration, President Bush was reluctant to get involved in the back and forth when he was attacked about about going to war with Iraq, about enhanced interrogation techniques, about Guantanamo Bay, and all of the things that we associate with the war on terror. He thought, well, if he got involved in that fray, that it was beneath the dignity of the office of the president. Well, I think the unintended consequence of adopting that approach was that I don't know that the president fully appreciated the fact that he is not only an individual policymaker, but he represents the Republican Party and the various branches of political thought on the right. And so when you're not responding to those attacks, that means that the other side gains ground. The other factor is the way the Obama administration has been governing. So certainly there were objections on the right to government bailouts, and also with the government bailouts under President Bush, concerns about how the Obama administration is handling things like the IRS scandal, how they're handling things like Benghazi and our foreign policy and things of that nature. And then thirdly, you have a Republican leadership that conservatives and others are on the right object to the way that they've been handling their responsibilities, whether they were in the minority between 2008 and 2010 or in the majority after that with the rise of the Tea Party. And there hasn't been a vigorous philosophical debate about what it means to govern. And so for over the past 2 decades, this at least 30 to 50% of the country has become increasingly frustrated. And so I think all of those strands give rise to the Trump phenomena, and people are underestimating the level of anger that's out there, that's built up over these last 2 decades, and so consequently, those that support Donald Trump are willing to give him a lot of leeway because the view is he can shake up the system.
And you mentioned something about the Republican Party. So generally speaking, what is it to be a Republican and what is it to be a Democrat?
Well, what you see in a lot of political science textbooks and elsewhere is simply laying out different policies that the parties adopt. I think it's more useful to look at the philosophical origins and theological origins of these parties because their philosophy is what impacts the policies that each side adopts. So as far as conservatism goes, the idea is that we have our sense of justice that is supernatural. It comes from God. God gives man, or imprints on man, his image and likeness, which means that we have a knowledge of natural law and that we have a knowledge of our inherent rights and duties as citizens. Consequently, there are certain demands that the state cannot make on human beings because things like worship and adoration belong to God. They don't belong to the state. And so there's a comfort level with maybe some of the rough edges of the governing structures because the idea is that the individual, the family, businesses, the church will occupy that space. Now, on the left, there's certainly a variety of political strands that you could pull from. Probably the most immediate would be the progressive thought, which is that social expediency rather than natural right determines the sphere of individual freedom and action. And so for example, when John Dewey talks about actual liberty, he's talking about the government taking the reins where we might think other private actors would be responsible for, and the government is driving those reins. And so you're not having just equality of opportunity, but for there to be there's a sense that there has to be an equality of outcome. So if you're looking at different trains of thought, if on the conservative side, I'd say look at William F. Buckley and Edmund Burke and Russell Kirk. On the left, you could take from John Dewey and Frank Goodnow and Woodrow Wilson and folks of that sort.
The election for president, it's not by popular vote. Can you explain who determines who becomes president?
Well, that's a great question. So we have to first start with the idea that we do not live in a democracy. Okay, contrary to what a lot of people think, this is not a democracy. The United States, if you look at what the founders say in the Federalist Papers and their other writings, we have a republic, which means that we elect our representatives and the representatives govern, and when they don't do what they're supposed to do, we vote them out of office. So we have to start first with the idea that we are a republic, with the idea being that whatever the situation is, the representatives, because of their wisdom, virtue, and experience, are going to be able to ameliorate some of the rougher edges of policy that are created that are created by the people. And so, what we have in Article 2, parts of Article 2 and the 12th Amendment, and the 12th Amendment is what governs how we get a president, we have an electoral college. So what presidents are trying to do, or presidential candidates are trying to do, is they are trying to accumulate electoral votes. And so the total number of electoral votes in the electoral college is 538. We get that because we allocate electors according to the number of congressional districts in each state, plus the number of senators. And so in California, we have 53 congressional districts, and we have 2 senators, so we get 55 electoral votes.
Is that pretty big? I don't mean to interrupt you because you're on a streak.
That's okay. Oh, thank you. That's 5 for the professor. Go ahead.
Is California, is that pretty big for the rest? I mean, does 55 votes, can it really swing things?
Yes, it can. Normally what we see on election night, however, is that because of the way our system works, it seems to solidify who the front runner is. So yes, if it's very close, and because we see that the polls start closing very early on the eastern seaboard, and then the Midwest, and then the West Coast, right, and then Hawaii and so forth. So we have a sense of how the election's going to go on election night based on those polls closing on the East Coast. But yeah, if it's close, then certainly there can be a difference.
Who makes up these 55 votes? I mean, generally speaking, who is the Electoral College? I mean, could you and I be one of these votes, or are they predetermined individuals?
Well, in California, the way it works is for the Democrats, my understanding is that each congressman can select a representative to participate in, or to be part of the Electoral College. For the Republicans, it's the nominees for statewide elected office and the committee chairs for the local committees are the electors. And so the Constitution leaves it to the states to determine how they're going to determine, how the electors are selected and so forth. And that's the system we have here in California. So if we're in any one of those positions, then yes, we have the opportunity to participate in the Electoral College.
What other countries or countries out there have a similar form of government like we do? Because we hear all the time about dictatorships and all kinds of other types of governments around the world. Could you look at a few or talk about a few that are like us?
Well, I'd say our closest relatives are Great Britain, Canada, and Australia, and I don't think it's a surprise that the governments that are closest to us come from the Anglosphere, because we have, in spite of the Revolutionary War, a lot of our legal traditions and the way we do things in our system of government and political thought comes from Great Britain. So if you look, for example, at Australia and Canada and Great Britain, they have their legislative branch. It's a parliamentary system, which means that, you can have a House of Lords and a House of Commons or a House of Representatives in another entity. And then the leadership, it's Parliament that chooses the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and so forth. So it's a little bit different than what we do here, but things like the rule of law, having three branches of government, separation of powers and checks and balances, all of those underlying principles we inherit from Britain. As a matter of fact, it's Baron de Montesquieu who said that when he's looking at what are some of the great forms of government out there, he identified both the Roman Republic and the Constitution of Great Britain, even though the Constitution is unwritten. And we see that we have those structures. The other difference that those governments have is that they are constitutional monarchies. So the Queen of England is the head of state for those countries. Now, for example, in Australia, they have a Governor General, and the Queen's executive powers are delegated to the Governor General, who sits in Parliament for Australia. But most of the powers that the Queen has are ceremonial in nature. So the actual day-to-day governance is handled by the Prime Minister and his cabinet.
A lot of people are talking about Supreme Court appointees. The next President of the United States is going to have an important role in determining the makeup of the Supreme Court. Why is that, and what are they talking about when they talk about that?
That's an excellent question. So there's two factors. First, judicial philosophy, and second is judicial review. Among the factors that a president looks at when he's selecting a nominee for a Supreme Court justice is their judicial philosophy. And generally speaking, you can break down judicial philosophies in one of two ways. The first school of thought is originalism. Now, the originalist philosophy says that when we interpret the Constitution, we do so looking at the intent of those that drafted and adopted the Constitution. The legal positivist judicial philosophy says, no, we look at what is considered normative at the time, and we look at sort of the social norms and standards of the current day, and we look at that and we interpose that on top of the Constitution, and we're asking, what does the Constitution mean for us today? So those are two remarkably different approaches to interpreting the Constitution. So when you have a justice who's going to be exercising the power of judicial review, those philosophies impact the result on the court case. So for your viewers, judicial review, that's the ability of the court to determine the constitutionality of legislative and executive acts. And so based on the judicial philosophy, you're going to get different results. So what does that mean in terms of a presidential selection? Well, historically, Republican presidents tend to appoint justices with an originalist philosophy, and Democratic presidents tend to nominate justices with a legal positivist philosophy.
So the next president is going to appoint one, two, or what How many do you think that the next president is going to appoint?
Well, I've heard numbers between 1 and 2, and some people saying as much as 4, because many of the justices are getting up in years. And I know, and it's been remarked upon Justice Scalia's passing that he would like to have a justice succeed him who had his same judicial philosophy.
So it's going to be interesting to see that this next president can appoint up to 4 Supreme Court judges. That's very interesting.
Yes, I don't think we haven't seen something like that, to my knowledge, since FDR, because he had a problem with the Supreme Court striking down various pieces of his New Deal legislation. Then there was the attempted court packing. Now that provision that would have allowed that never made it into the final bill. But sort of through attrition, through the retirement and these justices leaving, he was able, over the course of his tenure, to appoint 4 Supreme Court justices.
We are running out of time this week on the program. There are a lot of people out there who even till this day will say that Trump cannot win the presidency. Now, I'm not saying before Trump or be against him or before Clinton or be against her. Could Donald Trump win the presidency? A lot of people think this is still a show.
Well, I'll tell you, right now the Real Clear Politics average has Secretary Clinton leading President Trump by about 17 percentage points. Those are national averages. But clearly, I think Donald Trump thinks he can win because you'll notice on June 7th, his acceptance speech at one of the facilities that he owns, he was reaching out to Bernie Sanders supporters. So he clearly thinks that he has a possibility, and based on the way this election cycle is going, I wouldn't put anything past him.
Oh, you said President Trump.
I'm sorry,
Mr. Trump.
Mr. Trump, excuse me.
Bryan, thank you so much for coming on to this program. You clarified a lot of things that I think is helpful for people out there who really don't know the nitty-gritty about this area.
Well, I'm glad to be of service. Thank you for having me.
That's all for this edition of the Central Valley Ledger. Our guest this week has been a colleague of mine from law school, Bryan Tellalian. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. I'd like to take this opportunity and thank the volunteer crew. They are in the studio now making us look and sound good. Thank you to our audience members listening to this broadcast on 90.7 FM KFSR Fresno, and to those of you watching this on Comcast 93 and AT&T 99, the CMAC channels. From the beautiful studios of downtown Fresno, thank you, and tune in next week to a new edition.
KFSR and CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger every Sunday morning at 11:30. For a complete program schedule, visit kfsr.org.